Daniel Carter had been raising horses for nearly 2 decades. But he had never seen anything quite like this. Standing in the morning light, he watched Belle, his prized mare, graze in the open pasture. She was a magnificent animal, larger than most. Her coat a deep chestnut that shimmered with a subtle golden hue under the sun. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, powerful yet graceful, but what truly set her apart now wasn't her size or her beauty. It was the fact that she had been pregnant for 14 months, and still showed no signs of giving birth. Daniel had seen mares go a little over their expected time before, sometimes a week. Occasionally even a month, but this was unheard of. He had called Dr. Linda Garrett, his trusted veterinarian, several times over the past few months. Each time, she had reassured him that while Belle's pregnancy was longer than usual, the foal was still developing properly. The mare showed no signs of distress. Her appetite remained strong, and her energy levels were as high as ever. Still, it didn't sit right with him. "Morning, boss." Miguel, one of his stable hands, greeted him as he approached the fence. "You're out here early again." Daniel nodded, eyes still fixed on Belle. "Can't help it, she's got me worried." Miguel leaned on the wooden railing, watching the mare thoughtfully. "She doesn't look like she's struggling. Though, if anything, she seems stronger." Daniel had noticed the same thing. Most mares carrying overdue pregnancies tended to move slower, burdened by the extra weight. But Belle? She still moved with the same strength and fluidity as ever. Just yesterday, he had watched her break into a full gallop across the pasture, a powerful, effortless sprint that didn't belong to a mare in the final stages of pregnancy. "Dr. Garrett's coming by again this afternoon," Daniel said, more to himself than to Miguel. "I need to know what's going on." Miguel nodded. Let's hope she finally has some answers. As the morning wore on, Daniel busied himself with the usual ranch work, feeding the other horses, checking supplies, and overseeing training sessions for the younger colts. But no matter how much he tried to distract himself, his thoughts kept drifting back to Belle. By noon, Dr. Garrett's truck pulled up to the stable. She stepped out, carrying her equipment, and gave Daniel a small nod. "Still no changes?" "Nope," he sighed. "Still eating like a champion. Still moving like she's got no idea she should have foaled a month ago." Dr. Garrett chuckled lightly, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes as she walked over to Belle. The mare flicked her ears but stood still as the vet began her examination. Daniel watched intently as she ran her hands along Belle's belly, feeling for movement. Then she pulled out her portable ultrasound machine, rubbing gel over the mare's side before pressing the probe against her coat. Seconds passed as the black and white images flickered onto the screen. Then Dr. Garrett exhaled softly. "Well?" Daniel pressed. "The foal's still moving. Strong heartbeat. Bigger than I expected." Daniel crossed his arms. "Bigger how?" Dr. Garrett hesitated. "Large foals aren't uncommon, but this one, it's on the extreme end of the spectrum." A heavy silence settled between them. "What does that mean for the birth?" Daniel finally asked. Dr. Garrett took a breath. "It means we need to be ready for complications." Daniel's stomach tightened. He had delivered many foals over the years, but this was the first time he felt genuine uncertainty. He glanced at Belle, who was calmly flicking her tail, completely unaware of the worry she was causing. One way or another, they would get their answers soon. Daniel spent the rest of the afternoon going over Dr. Garrett's words in his head. "We need to be ready for complications." That was easier said than done. He had delivered plenty of foals before. Some smooth, some difficult, but this was unlike anything he had experienced. A pregnancy this long, with a foal this large, it made no sense. After Dr. Garrett left, Daniel went back to Belle's pasture. Watching her graze, the mare seemed unaffected by all the concern surrounding her. She flicked her ears, swatted away a few flies with her tail, and kept eating as if nothing was unusual. But something was unusual. Miguel approached him again, carrying a bucket of feed. "Boss, you keep staring at her like she's about to explode." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Because I don't know what's going to happen." "Have you ever seen a mare go this long before?" Miguel shook his head. "Nope, but if she's not acting sick or weak, maybe we just have to trust her body to do what it needs to." Daniel wanted to believe that. But later that evening, something happened that made his unease grow even stronger. It started just before sunset. "Belle, who had spent most of the day grazing peacefully, suddenly became restless. She paced along the fence line, ears twitching at every sound. Her tail swished more aggressively than usual, and she kept pawing at the ground, as if something was making her uneasy. Daniel watched closely. He had seen these signs before: restlessness, agitation, pawing. It usually meant labor was approaching. But there was something different about the way Belle moved. "She's been like this for an hour," Miguel observed, walking up beside him. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, but no contractions, no sweating, no water breaking, just pacing." Miguel frowned. "Think she's in pain?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, "but I don't like it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Belle's pacing turned into something else entirely: anxious circling. She moved in tight loops, occasionally stopping to paw at the ground before continuing again. Then, out of nowhere, she threw her head back and let out a sharp, loud whinny. Daniel stiffened. Belle was usually a quiet mare. That sound, it wasn't normal. "She's calling," Miguel murmured. But for what? Daniel had no answer. He only knew one thing: something was changing, and they needed to be ready. By nightfall, Belle had calmed slightly, but the unease in Daniel's gut remained. He decided to stay in the stable for the night, keeping a close eye on her. If labor was starting, he wanted to be there. Miguel stayed too, bringing out a couple of old chairs and setting them up outside Belle's stall. "Might as well get comfortable," he muttered, stretching his legs. Daniel, however, couldn't relax. He leaned against the stall door, watching Belle closely. The mare stood still now, her breathing steady, but every few minutes, she flicked her ears, eyes darting toward the entrance of the stable, as if she was waiting for something. Midnight came and went. No contractions, no water breaking, just silence, interrupted by the occasional restless stomp of a hoof. Daniel rubbed a hand down his face. "I don't get it. Every sign points to her getting ready for birth. But she's just waiting." Miguel yawned. "Maybe she's just messing with us." Daniel wasn't convinced. Around 2 a.m., he finally drifted into an uneasy half-sleep. But only an hour later, he was jolted awake by the sound of hooves striking wood, hard. His eyes snapped open. Belle had kicked the stall wall, not just once, but repeatedly. He rushed to her side. The mare's nostrils flared, her muscles tensed, but she wasn't in distress. Her eyes were sharp, focused. She wasn't kicking out of pain. It was almost like she was trying to tell him something. Miguel scrambled to his feet. "Boss, I think it's time." Daniel wasn't so sure. Something about this was still off, and he had a feeling things were only going to get stranger from here. Daniel stared at Belle, trying to make sense of what was happening. She showed no signs of distress, but her behavior was unusual. A horse that had carried a pregnancy beyond its normal term would typically show discomfort or exhaustion. Yet Belle remained strong, standing with an air of quiet determination. Miguel frowned. Could the foal be too big? He guessed. Daniel didn't answer right away. If the foal was too large, it could indeed complicate the birth. But Belle was a large, strong mare. If there had been a problem, it should have become evident much earlier. Not just now. "We need to call a vet," he finally said, his voice filled with concern. Miguel nodded. "I'll call right away." As Miguel hurried off to grab his phone, Daniel kept his eyes on Belle. She stood still, her ears flicking at the surrounding noises. Then, almost deliberately, she took a slow circle around the stall, her hooves pressing firmly into the packed earth beneath her. A strange chill ran down Daniel's spine. Why did it feel like she was waiting for something? Nearly an hour later, veterinarian Dr. Laura Parker arrived at the ranch. She specialized in equine reproduction and had over a decade of experience. But when Miguel described Belle's condition over the phone, she had hesitated for a moment. "This mare is overdue but isn't showing any signs of distress or exhaustion," she repeated as she stepped out of her vehicle. "That's right," Daniel confirmed, leading her toward the stall. Laura opened her medical bag, pulled on gloves, and began her examination. She listened to Belle's heartbeat, gently pressed along her belly, and applied light pressure at key points to check for any abnormal reactions. Daniel and Miguel stood silently, waiting with bated breath. A few minutes later, Laura straightened up, an expression of surprise crossing her face. "She's perfectly healthy," she said. "No infections, no unusual tension. Both her heart rate and the foals are normal." Daniel frowned. Then, why hasn't she given birth yet? Laura hesitated, then shook her head. I've never seen anything quite like this. Maybe the foal just isn't ready yet. Miguel raised an eyebrow. Is that even possible? Gestation periods for horses are pretty consistent. Laura shrugged. Yes, but there can be biological variations in individual horses. However, if the foal doesn't come in the next few days, we may need to intervene. Daniel looked at Belle. She didn't seem worried at all. She remained calm, as if she knew everything would be fine. But Daniel couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. A horse carrying a pregnancy for 14 months and still not giving birth? That was unheard of, and he feared this was far from over. The next few days at the ranch passed with an unusual tension in the air. Everyone kept an eye on Belle, expecting something, anything, to happen. But despite the passage of time, she remained as calm and composed as ever. Daniel barely slept. He checked on Belle several times each night, always hoping to see signs of labor. Each time, he was met with the same image, Belle standing quietly, her large body steady, her breathing slow and controlled. It was almost as if she knew when the right time would come. Miguel and the other ranch hands were equally restless. It's not normal, one of the younger workers, Luis, muttered. I've been around horses my whole life, but I've never seen something like this. You and me both, Daniel admitted. Dr. Laura Parker had visited twice since her first examination. She ran more tests, checked Belle's hormone levels, even performed an ultrasound. Each time, the results were the same. The foal was alive. The mare was healthy. And yet, nothing changed. On the fourth evening, Laura stayed late at the ranch, sitting on an overturned bucket outside Belle's stall. She rubbed her temples, thinking, it's strange, but I don't think there's an immediate danger. She said at last, if she were in distress, we'd intervene right away, but for now, we wait. Daniel nodded, though waiting was the hardest part. Then, just past midnight, something finally happened. A deep, guttural sound echoed through the stable. Daniel shot up from the makeshift cot he had placed near Belle's stall. Miguel, who had been dozing in a chair nearby, startled awake. The sound came again, low, almost like a growl. It wasn't Belle, it was the other horses. The entire stable had gone eerily silent, except for a few nervous stomps and uneasy huffs from the mares in the nearby stalls. Daniel's heart pounded as he turned toward Belle. She wasn't moving. She stood in the same steady posture as before. But something about her looked different. The hair along her neck bristled slightly. Her ears were pinned forward, and her breathing had deepened. She's starting, Miguel whispered, but Daniel wasn't so sure. Something felt off. Then Belle took a step forward, lowering her head slightly, her nostrils flaring as she exhaled a deep breath. And at that exact moment, the barn doors creaked open. Someone had just arrived. Miguel turned his head sharply toward the door, his hand tightening around Belle's lead rope. Daniel took an instinctive step forward, positioning himself slightly between the horse and the entrance. The wooden door groaned as it swung open fully, revealing Laura. She was slightly out of breath, as if she had been rushing, and her eyes darted straight to Belle. I called Dr. Harris, she announced. He's on his way. Miguel exhaled, nodding. Good. He hesitated, glancing at Daniel. She's close, but something doesn't feel right. Laura approached carefully, her gaze fixed on Belle. The mare stood still, her massive frame shifting only slightly with each deep breath. Her ears twitched back and forth, her muscles tense yet controlled. She's not panicking, Laura noted, stepping beside Daniel, but she's not pushing either. Daniel's jaw clenched. That's what's worrying me. The minutes crawled by. Belle shifted her weight from one leg to another, her tail swishing gently, but there were no strong contractions, no urgent signs of labor progressing. Then, outside, the sound of tires rolling over gravel made them all look up. Miguel was the first to move. That must be him. Laura nodded, stepping back as Miguel strode toward the entrance. Belle let out a deep exhale, her large body trembling ever so slightly. Daniel reached out, pressing a reassuring hand against her neck. It's all right, girl, he murmured, just a little longer. The sound of hurried footsteps on gravel echoed as Dr. Harris approached, his bag slung over his shoulder. Miguel pulled the door open wider to let him in. What are we looking at? Dr. Harris asked immediately, eyes scanning Belle with practiced precision. She's been restless, "But she's not pushing," Daniel answered, stepping aside to let the vet get closer. 14 months now. We thought tonight was the night. But something feels off. Dr. Harris moved with calm efficiency, setting his bag down before running a firm hand along Belle's flank. She shivered slightly under his touch but did not resist. Her breathing was steady, though there was a subtle tension in her posture. "Let's check," he murmured. Slipping on a glove, he carefully reached beneath Belle's tail, pressing gently along her abdomen. The room was silent, save for Belle's breathing and the soft rustling of hay beneath their feet. Then, after a long moment, Dr. Harris exhaled. "The foal is positioned correctly," he said, sounding relieved, "but she's not dilating enough. That's why she hasn't been able to push." Miguel and Laura exchanged a glance. "So what do we do?" Laura asked, worry creeping into her voice. "I'll give her something to help stimulate labor," Dr. Harris replied, already reaching for a syringe from his bag. "It should encourage contractions. If that doesn't work, we may have to intervene." He administered the injection swiftly, then stepped back, watching Belle closely. The minutes ticked by, heavy with anticipation. Then, finally, Belle let out a long, low groan. Her muscles tensed, and her tail lifted slightly. "There," Dr. Harris murmured. "That's it, girl. Come on." Belle shifted her weight, nostrils flaring. A shudder ran through her. And then, finally, a strong contraction rippled down her body. Miguel exhaled sharply. "It's starting." Laura grabbed a clean towel, readying herself. Daniel kept one hand on Belle's neck, offering silent reassurance. Another contraction, then another. The process was slow but steady. Belle's large frame trembling as her body did the work nature intended. Minutes passed. Then, with one final powerful push, a slick, dark form slid into the hay. A hush fell over the barn. Dr. Harris was the first to move, wiping fluid away from the foal's nose and mouth. A heartbeat later, a tiny, trembling breath filled the air. And then, weak but unmistakable, the foal's first soft whinny. Miguel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Laura pressed a hand over her heart, eyes shining with relief. Belle, exhausted but alert, turned her massive head and stretched her nose toward the newborn. "She did it," Daniel murmured. The foal twitched, wet and fragile, but undeniably alive. Now, the real journey would begin. The foal lay still for a moment, its tiny body rising and falling with each breath. Belle, exhausted but attentive, nuzzled it gently, urging it to move. Then, with a weak but determined effort, the newborn wobbled, its long legs twitching. Miguel, who had seen his fair share of foalings, frowned slightly. "It's big," he muttered under his breath. Daniel crouched beside him, eyes narrowing as he studied the newborn. Miguel was right. The foal was larger than usual, its limbs longer, its chest broader. And then, as the dim barn light reflected off its damp coat, something else became clear. Its color was unusual. Not quite black, not quite chestnut, somewhere in between, with a strange, almost metallic sheen. Laura sucked in a breath. "That's different." Dr. Harris, who had been wiping down his instruments, finally turned to look. He studied the foal for a long moment before nodding. "Rare, but not unheard of," he said. "Some foals are born with a sheen like that, but it often fades as they grow." Daniel reached out carefully, running a hand down the foal's neck. Beneath the wet coat, he could feel strong muscles, surprisingly developed for a newborn. The foal twitched at his touch, then shook its head, a small, defiant motion. Miguel chuckled. "That one's got spirit." Belle, as if sensing their attention, nickered softly, lowering her head to nudge the foal once more. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the foal gathered its impossibly long legs beneath it and pushed up. It wobbled, almost comically, before collapsing back into the hay. "Come on, little one," Laura murmured, encouraging. Again, the foal tried. This time, it stayed up a little longer, legs trembling under its own weight. It was strong, unusually strong. Dr. Harris nodded approvingly. "That's a good sign. A foal that gets up quickly has a better chance of thriving." Belle nickered again, stepping closer, her presence steadying the newborn. This time, with a determined huff, the foal managed to stay upright. A few shaky steps, then another. Then, as if it had always known how, It took its first confident stride toward its mother. The small group let out a collective breath. "Now that," Daniel murmured, "is one impressive foal." Miguel grinned. "I think we're gonna have our hands full with this one." The foal, as if understanding the words, flicked its ears and let out a soft snort. And just like that, its journey had begun. The foal grew fast, faster than any of them expected. By the time it was only a month old, it was already larger than some 3-month-old foals. Its legs, once awkwardly long, had grown into powerful limbs. Its chest had broadened, muscles filling out at an unusual rate. Miguel, who had raised dozens of foals, shook his head in disbelief. "I've never seen one grow like this." Daniel, standing beside him, crossed his arms. "Neither have I. It's eating more, moving more, like it just absorbs everything around it." It wasn't just the size. The foal, now officially named Titan, was incredibly strong. At barely 2 months old, it could outrun and outmaneuver foals twice its age. Its strides were longer, smoother, while other young horses stumbled and played clumsily. Titan was precise, deliberate. Even the older horses in the pasture seemed to notice. Some were wary, others curious, but none challenged it. By the time Titan was 6 months old, it looked almost a year old. Laura watched it gallop across the field one morning and muttered, "It's unbelievable." Dr. Harris, who had been tracking Titan's growth with a mixture of fascination and concern, measured it carefully. "It's healthy," he reassured them. "Very healthy. Some horses are just genetically gifted. Maybe Belle carried a foal with exceptional lineage." But Daniel wasn't so sure. Belle had always been a strong mare, but nothing about her suggested this level of athleticism. One day, while checking on the horses, Daniel noticed something that unsettled him. Titan wasn't just growing faster. It was learning faster. At only 7 months old, it had figured out how to open the latch to the gate. Twice, Miguel laughed when he saw it. But Daniel frowned. "That's not normal. Foals don't do that." They started double-locking the gates. Then, one morning, Titan did something that left them speechless. Laura was leading one of the older horses back from the paddock when Titan, standing nearby, watched her closely. She clicked her tongue, gave a gentle tug on the lead rope, and the older horse obediently followed. The next day, when Daniel walked past Titan's pasture, the young horse did the same motion, clicking its tongue against its teeth. Mimicking Laura, Daniel stopped in his tracks. Titan watched him, ears flicking forward, as if waiting for a reaction. It had learned. Daniel turned to Miguel. "Tell me you saw that." Miguel, for once, had no words. For a while, Titan's rapid growth and intelligence were just an interesting anomaly, something they observed with curiosity but not concern. That changed the day Titan escaped. It happened early in the morning. Daniel arrived at the stables as usual, expecting a quiet start to the day. But the moment he stepped out of his truck, he noticed something was wrong. The main pasture gate was open, and Titan was gone. Miguel, already there, was pacing nervously. "I don't understand how it happened," he muttered. "We locked it last night. Both latches." Daniel clenched his jaw. Titan had been growing stronger and smarter by the day. If it had learned to open the gate, that meant locking it the usual way wouldn't be enough anymore. But this wasn't the time to analyze. They needed to find him. They split up, searching the nearby fields and trails. Titan was fast, far faster than any horse its age. If it had truly run off, it could be miles away. Laura called from the other side of the property. "Tracks, heading toward the woods." Daniel's stomach tightened. That was bad news. The forest was dense and dangerous. It wasn't just the rough terrain, there were wild animals, unstable ground, and deep creeks. A young horse, no matter how strong, could easily get injured in there. They moved quickly, following the deep hoofprints in the soft dirt. An hour passed. Then two. No sign of Titan. Miguel was starting to worry out loud when they heard it. A sharp, panicked neigh, echoing from somewhere up ahead. Daniel's heart pounded as he ran toward the sound. And then he saw him. Titan was trapped. The young horse had ventured into a narrow ravine, where the ground had given way beneath him. He was stuck in a muddy slope, his powerful legs struggling for traction. "Easy, boy," Daniel murmured, stepping carefully closer. Titan's nostrils flared, his eyes wide with panic. If he struggled too much, he could injure himself or make the situation worse. Miguel cursed under his breath. We're gonna need ropes. And a lot of muscle." Laura was already on the radio, calling for extra help. Daniel kept his eyes on Titan, thinking fast. They had to act quickly. But they couldn't rush. One wrong move and Titan could break a leg, or worse. And that was a risk they couldn't afford to take. Time was running out. Titan struggled again, his hooves slipping against the muddy slope. If he panicked too much, he might twist a leg or injure himself even worse. Daniel turned to Miguel. "We don't have time to wait for extra hands. We need to at least stabilize him now." Miguel nodded. "Ropes?" "Ropes," Daniel confirmed, "and something to calm him down." Laura ran back to the stables, returning minutes later with sturdy ropes and a tranquilizer syringe. "Just a mild dose," she assured them, "enough to keep him from thrashing." Daniel moved closer, speaking in a low, soothing voice. Titan's ears twitched at the sound, but his body remained tense. Daniel slowly reached out, pressing a steady hand against the young horse's powerful shoulder. "It's okay, buddy," he murmured. "We've got you." Laura moved carefully, injecting the mild sedative. Within moments, Titan's breathing slowed. His eyes remained alert, but his panic seemed to ease. Miguel looped the first rope around Titan's chest, securing it carefully. "We need to pull just enough to help him, but not so much that we scare him." Daniel secured a second rope around Titan's hindquarters. "On my count. Ready?" Miguel and Laura took their positions. 1, 2, 3, pull. The ropes tightened. Titan tensed but didn't resist. His hooves scraped against the mud as they slowly lifted him upward. For a moment, it seemed to be working. Then the ground beneath Titan gave way even more. The young horse lurched downward, his body slipping deeper into the muddy slope. Miguel lost his footing, stumbling backward as the rope jerked in his hands. Daniel reacted instantly. He grabbed onto Titan's lead rope, using his full weight to keep the horse from sliding further. "Hold on," he shouted. Laura braced herself, gripping the second rope tightly. "We need more leverage." Miguel scrambled back to his feet, glancing around desperately. "We need the truck." Daniel nodded. "Go." Miguel ran back to the stables. Meanwhile, Daniel and Laura held on, every muscle straining against Titan's weight. The young horse let out a sharp, frightened sound but didn't struggle. He was exhausted, his massive chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Minutes later, the rumble of an engine echoed through the trees. Miguel returned, maneuvering the truck as close as he could. "Attach the ropes to the hitch," Daniel instructed. Miguel secured the lines. "Nice and slow," Daniel warned. "We don't want to jolt him." Miguel eased the truck forward. Titan's body shifted, lifted inch by inch. Then, finally, he was free. The moment his hooves touched stable ground, Titan stumbled but remained standing. His legs trembled with exhaustion, but he was uninjured. Daniel exhaled, running a hand down Titan's damp neck. "You scared the hell out of us, buddy." Titan snorted softly, leaning against him. Miguel wiped sweat from his forehead. "I think it's time we upgrade those gates." Laura nodded. "And keep a closer eye on our special horse." Because one thing was clear. Titan was no ordinary horse. Titan's recovery was fast, almost too fast. By the next morning, he was not only standing firm but also moving with surprising energy. Most young horses would be stiff or hesitant after such an ordeal. But Titan seemed completely unaffected. Daniel watched him closely as the colt trotted around the enclosure, his powerful muscles moving effortlessly beneath his sleek coat. "You'd think he wasn't stuck in a mud pit just yesterday," Miguel muttered. Laura nodded, checking her notes. "His vitals are strong, no swelling, no soreness. It's almost unnatural." Daniel shot her a look. "You mean unexpected," he corrected. Laura hesitated, then nodded. "Right, unexpected." But the way she glanced back at Titan showed she was thinking the same thing as Miguel. There was something different about him. For the next few weeks, Titan continued to develop at an extraordinary pace. At just 5 months old, he was nearly the size of a yearling. His legs were longer, his chest broader, and his muscles more defined than any colt his age. His coat, once a simple bay, now had a striking sheen that caught the light in unusual ways. His intelligence was another thing that stood out. While most foals fumbled through training, Titan picked up commands faster than any horse Daniel had ever worked with. He learned to follow cues, respond to gestures, and even seemed to anticipate what was being asked of him before the command was given. Word of the unusual colt spread quickly. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up outside the ranch. A tall man in a sharp suit stepped out, his eyes immediately scanning the paddocks. Daniel exchanged a glance with Miguel. They weren't used to strangers showing up like this. "Can I help you?" Daniel called. The man smiled in a polite but calculated way. "I certainly hope so. My name is Dr. Evan Cole. I'm a geneticist specializing in equine development." Daniel stiffened slightly. "And what brings you all the way out here?" "I heard about a rather remarkable young colt," Dr. Cole said, his gaze shifting toward Titan, who stood watching the scene with an almost human-like curiosity. "I'd like to see him for myself." Daniel felt a flicker of unease. He wasn't sure how much he wanted to share about Titan with a stranger, especially one who claimed to be a geneticist. "I appreciate your interest, Dr. Cole," he said carefully, "but Titan is just a strong, well-developed colt. We're not looking for outside studies or evaluations." Dr. Cole smiled, but there was something unreadable in his expression. "I understand your caution, Mr. Daniels." Daniel tensed slightly at the formal address. Few people called him by his full name. "I assure you," Dr. Cole continued, "I'm not here to interfere with your work. But I do believe this colt is unique. His rapid growth, his intelligence, these aren't typical traits, even among the best bloodlines. I'd simply like to run some non-invasive tests. Blood work, genetic sequencing, purely for scientific understanding." Daniel crossed his arms. "And what do we get out of that?" Dr. Cole chuckled. "Knowledge, first of all. If Titan carries unusual genetics, understanding them could benefit equine breeding, performance training, even veterinary medicine." Laura, who had been silent until now, cleared her throat. "With all due respect, Dr. Cole, Titan is healthy and thriving. Unless there's a medical reason for concern, we don't see the need for testing." Dr. Cole studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough." He reached into his pocket and handed Daniel a card. "If you ever change your mind, give me a call." Daniel took the card but didn't say anything. As the sleek car drove away, Miguel exhaled. "That guy gave me the creeps. You and me both," Daniel muttered, slipping the card into his pocket. "But something tells me we haven't seen the last of him." Over the next few weeks, Titan continued to defy expectations. At 6 months old, he was the size of an adult mare. His strength was unmatched, and his endurance levels were incredible. Most young horses tired quickly, but Titan could run and train for hours without showing signs of fatigue. But then, one morning, something happened that changed everything. It was just before dawn when a loud crash echoed from the stables. Daniel, Laura, and Miguel sprinted toward the noise, their boots kicking up dust as they ran. Inside the paddock, Titan stood tense, his ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. The wooden fence behind him was shattered. The thick planks splintered as if something had slammed through them with incredible force. "What the hell?" Miguel started. Then they saw the other horse. It was one of their prize stallions, a powerful bay named Thunder. He was lying on the ground, his legs kicking weakly as he struggled to get up. Titan took a step forward, his muscles rippling beneath his coat, and Thunder immediately flinched away, eyes wide with fear. Daniel's stomach tightened. Titan was still just a colt. He should have been no match for a full-grown stallion. But the broken fence and Thunder's reaction told a different story. Something had happened between them, something that should have been impossible. Daniel took a slow breath, trying to assess the situation rationally. Titan had broken through the fence, and Thunder was injured, but why? Had they been fighting? That didn't make sense. Titan was still a colt, younger and less experienced. He shouldn't have been able to overpower a mature stallion. Laura crouched next to Thunder, running her hands carefully along his legs and shoulders. "No fractures," she murmured, "but he's definitely shaken." Miguel whistled under his breath. "Shaken? He looks like he saw a ghost." Daniel approached Titan cautiously. The colt wasn't acting aggressive, but he was tense. His ears flicked back and forth, his breathing deep but steady. It wasn't the posture of a horse that had just fought, it was something else. "What happened, boy?" Daniel muttered, gently running his hand along Titan's muscular neck. The colt exhaled sharply but didn't move away. Then Laura's voice cut through the morning air. "Daniel, look at this." She pointed at the broken fence. The thick wooden beams weren't just snapped, they were splintered outward, as if something had burst through from inside the paddock. Miguel frowned. "Are you saying Titan did that? From inside?" Laura hesitated. "If Thunder was on the other side and they got into a fight, maybe Titan charged into the fence." Daniel wasn't convinced. "But that doesn't explain why Thunder looks terrified of him." The stallion, usually dominant and fearless, was still lying on the ground, eyes darting toward Titan as if expecting another attack. Daniel sighed. "Let's get Thunder back to the stable. We'll keep him separated from Titan for now." Miguel fetched a lead rope and coaxed Thunder to his feet. The stallion was shaky but able to walk. They led him away, leaving Titan standing in the paddock, ears pricked forward as he watched them go. That afternoon, Daniel reviewed the security footage from the paddock cameras. He fast-forwarded through hours of normal activity until he reached the early morning. On the screen, Titan was pacing near the fence, ears flicking back and forth. Thunder stood on the other side, tossing his head as if agitated. Then, without warning, Titan reared up and slammed his front hooves against the fence. The impact was so powerful that the wooden beams cracked instantly. Thunder reared in response, and for a moment, the two horses seemed to challenge each other. Then Titan lunged forward. It wasn't a simple kick or bite, it was a full-force charge. His head struck the fence with enough strength to send splinters flying. Thunder stumbled backward, clearly spooked. The fence collapsed under the second impact, and Titan surged forward. The screen shook as the camera was jostled. But the final frame before the footage cut out showed Thunder scrambling to get away while Titan stood tall, unscathed. Daniel sat back, exhaling slowly. Titan hadn't just broken the fence, he had plowed through it with a force no normal colt should have had. Something was different about him. The incident with Titan didn't go unnoticed. A few days later, Daniel received an unexpected visit. A black SUV rolled up the dusty ranch road, stopping near the main stable. The doors opened, and three men stepped out, dressed in neat but practical clothing. Their movements precise and businesslike. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow and walked toward them. Laura and Miguel stood nearby, watching cautiously. The man in the lead, tall with graying hair, extended a hand. "Mr. Dawson, I presume?" Daniel hesitated for only a moment before shaking it. "That's me. And you are?" The man smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Dr. Richard Hayes. I'm a geneticist. This is my colleague Dr. Evan Carter, and our assistant, Mr. Lewis." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Geneticists? What business do you have here?" Dr. Hayes glanced toward the paddock where Titan was grazing, his muscular form unmistakable even from a distance. "We've heard about your colt. Quite an extraordinary animal, isn't he?" Daniel's posture stiffened. He didn't like where this was going. Dr. Carter, a younger man with sharp features, stepped forward. "We've been conducting research on equine genetics, particularly in performance and endurance traits. Exceptional horses like Titan could provide valuable insight." "Insight?" Miguel scoffed. "Sounds like you just want to take him." Hayes chuckled. "Nothing so dramatic. We simply want to run some tests, blood work, DNA analysis. Nothing invasive. We'd, of course, compensate you handsomely." Daniel crossed his arms. "Not interested." Dr. Carter sighed. "Look, Mr. Dawson, horses like Titan don't just happen. You must have noticed his unusual strength, his rapid growth." Daniel didn't reply. Carter pressed on. "We're not asking for much. Just a few samples. If you agree, we'll make it worth your while." Daniel's jaw tightened. Everything about this felt wrong. He didn't care how much they were offering. He wasn't going to let strangers poke and prod Titan. "Titan is fine where he is," he said firmly. "We don't need your tests." Dr. Hayes exhaled, his expression unreadable. "That's unfortunate, but I understand." He turned to leave, but as he walked away, he paused. "Just remember, Mr. Dawson, the scientific community doesn't ignore anomalies like Titan forever." With that, they climbed back into the SUV and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust behind them. That night, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Laura sat at the kitchen table, arms crossed. "You think they'll come back?" Daniel exhaled. "I'd bet on it." Miguel frowned. "So what do we do?" Daniel looked out the window toward the stable, where Titan rested safely in his stall. He knew one thing for certain. They had to be ready. The ranch remained on high alert in the following days. Daniel and Miguel took turns checking on Titan at night, making sure he was safe in the stable. Laura double-checked the locks on the barn doors. Even the ranch hands were instructed to keep an eye out for anything unusual. But despite their precautions, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. And he was right. One evening, just after sunset, Miguel noticed a glint of light from the hills overlooking the ranch. It was faint, just a brief flicker, but it was enough to put him on edge. He grabbed his binoculars and scanned the ridge. At first, he saw nothing but shadows. But then, there, a figure. Someone crouched near a cluster of rocks. Watching, Miguel's stomach clenched. He rushed to find Daniel, who was in the main barn tending to Titan. "Someone's up on the ridge," Miguel said, breathless. Daniel tensed. "You sure?" Miguel nodded. "They're watching us." Daniel grabbed his rifle from the office and moved toward the door. "Stay here. If anything happens, get Laura and call the sheriff." Miguel frowned. "What if they're armed?" Daniel didn't answer. He stepped outside, moving cautiously toward the edge of the property. The figure was gone. Whoever had been watching had disappeared. The next morning, things took a turn. Laura went to feed Titan. But when she entered his stall, she stopped short. The latch was undone, the door slightly ajar. Her heart pounded. Daniel and Miguel came running. "What is it?" Laura pointed. "Someone tried to get in." Daniel inspected the door. No signs of forced entry. No broken locks. Whoever did this had known exactly what they were doing. "They're getting bolder," Miguel muttered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We need to stop them before they try again." That night, Daniel and Miguel set a trap. They left the barn unlocked, just enough to make it look like an oversight. Then, they waited in the shadows, watching. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. The ranch was silent, save for the occasional rustling of the horses. Then, movement. A dark figure slipped toward the barn. Daniel gripped his rifle. Miguel held his breath. The figure reached the door, hesitated, then pushed it open. Daniel moved. "Stop right there," he shouted. Stepping forward, the intruder spun around, momentarily blinded by the beam of Daniel's flashlight. For a second, no one moved. Then, the figure bolted. Miguel lunged, tackling the man to the ground. A brief struggle followed, but Miguel was stronger. He pinned the intruder's arms and ripped off his mask. It was one of the researchers, Louis. The assistant. Daniel loomed over him, furious. "You've got 5 seconds to explain before I call the sheriff." Louis swallowed hard. I was just following orders." "From who?" Louis hesitated, then muttered, "Dr. Hayes." Daniel exhaled sharply. He had known they would come back, but to break in? To steal Titan? Laura appeared in the doorway. Phone in hand. "I'm calling the sheriff." Louis' eyes widened. "No, wait, listen. I wasn't going to take the horse. I just needed a sample. Blood, hair, anything." Miguel tightened his grip. "That's not any better, idiot." Daniel's patience ran out. "Tell Hayes to stay the hell away from my ranch." And with that, he motioned to Laura. "Call it in." Louis paled as Laura spoke to the sheriff. He knew he was in deep trouble. Titan snorted from his stall, watching the scene unfold. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The sheriff arrived within 15 minutes. The flashing red and blue lights cast eerie shadows over the barn as Louis stood in handcuffs. His face pale. Sheriff Carter, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, eyed him with a mixture of annoyance and mild amusement. Breaking and entering a barn. Carter muttered, "You must be the first man I've arrested for livestock-related burglary in years." Louis didn't respond. He knew anything he said could be used against him. Daniel crossed his arms. "I want a restraining order against anyone from Dr. Hayes' team stepping foot on my property." Carter exhaled. "I'll see what I can do. But you know these research folks, if they think your horse is special, they won't stop at one dumb mistake like this." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then I'll make sure they regret trying again." Carter nodded before turning back to Louis. "Come on, let's go." As the sheriff's car drove off, Miguel rubbed his forehead. "They won't give up, will they?" Daniel sighed. "No, and that means we have to be even more careful." The next few weeks were tense. Titan was growing faster than any of them had anticipated. At just a few months old, he was nearly the size of a yearling. His legs were thick with muscle, his coat sleek, his movements fluid and powerful. Miguel watched him run one afternoon, shaking his head. He's built like a racehorse, but with the strength of a draft horse." Even Laura, who had seen countless foals grow up on the ranch, was stunned by his rapid development. "I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. But Daniel wasn't just worried about Titan's growth, he was worried about the attention it would bring. And then, his fears were confirmed. One morning, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the ranch. A woman in a tailored suit stepped out, accompanied by two men. Dr. Emily Hayes. Daniel was already on the porch, arms crossed, waiting. Hayes smiled politely. "Mr. Callahan, I hope we can talk civilly this time." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Your assistant broke into my barn. That doesn't exactly put me in a talking mood." She didn't flinch. "Lewis acted independently, and he's been dismissed from my team." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Convenient." Hayes exhaled. "Listen, I understand your frustration, but Titan is extraordinary. We believe he could be the key to breakthroughs in genetics, performance, even medical research, if you let us study him." Daniel cut her off. "No." Hayes pursed her lips. "You didn't even let me finish." "You don't have to." Daniel took a step closer. "Titan is my horse. I don't care what kind of breakthroughs you think he represents. He's not some lab experiment." Hayes studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but let me be clear, this isn't over. People are going to notice Titan. The bigger he gets, the more interest he'll draw. If you think you can keep him hidden forever, you're mistaken." Daniel's hands curled into fists. "You're trespassing. Get off my land." Hayes hesitated, then turned back to her car. Before getting in, she glanced over her shoulder. "Be careful, Mr. Callahan," she said softly. "Not everyone will ask nicely." Then she was gone. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. This was only the beginning. Daniel had expected trouble, but not this. When the barn doors creaked open that night, he had his rifle ready. But the intruders were faster, smarter, and more prepared than he thought. By the time he and Miguel reached the barn, Titan was already gone. The stall door hung open, the latches cut clean through with bolt cutters. The tire tracks in the dirt showed that a vehicle had been here. "Damn it," Miguel cursed, running a hand through his hair. Daniel's heart pounded. They planned this. They knew exactly what they were doing. No hesitation, no panic, just cold, calculated execution. Miguel turned, eyes dark with anger. "We need to go after them. Now." Daniel was already moving, running toward his truck. Laura burst out of the house, phone in hand. "I called Carter. He's on his way. There's no time to wait." Daniel threw himself into the driver's seat and gunned the engine. Miguel jumped in beside him. The truck roared to life, kicking up dust as it tore down the dirt road. The thieves had a head start. But Daniel knew these roads better than anyone. If they were heading toward the highway, there were only a few ways they could have gone. He slammed the gas pedal. They won't get far. The chase was brutal. The stolen truck carrying Titan was fast, weaving recklessly along the winding roads. Miguel spotted them first, red taillights flashing in the distance. "There, that's them." Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel. They were pushing the stolen vehicle hard, but it had a trailer attached, slowing them down. "We have to stop them before they reach the main highway," Miguel said. Daniel didn't need to be told twice. He floored the gas, bringing their truck closer, the headlights illuminating the dust cloud behind the fleeing vehicle. Then, suddenly, bang, a shot rang out. Glass shattered as a bullet struck the windshield. "Get down," Miguel shouted, ducking as another shot flew past. They were armed, and they were willing to kill for Titan. Daniel clenched his jaw. "They won't scare me off that easy." He swung the truck into position, trying to force the stolen vehicle off the road. The trailer swerved violently, Titan's terrified whinny echoing through the night. "They're losing control," Miguel yelled. Then, bang, another shot. The tire exploded. The stolen truck skidded, the driver struggling to keep control. Sparks flew as the trailer tipped dangerously to one side. Daniel didn't give them a chance to recover. He rammed the truck's bumper into the side of their vehicle, forcing them toward the ditch. The stolen vehicle veered, metal screeching, then flipped. Miguel was out of the truck before Daniel had even stopped completely. He sprinted toward the wreckage, gun drawn. The thieves were dazed, struggling to move. One of them reached for a weapon. Miguel kicked it away. Daniel yanked the trailer door open. Titan stood inside, eyes wide with fear, but unharmed. Relief flooded through Daniel. They had him back. But he knew one thing for certain: whoever these men worked for, they would try again. And next time, they might not be so reckless. The aftermath was chaos. By the time Carter and the police arrived, the thieves were already restrained, bruised and cursing on the ground. Titan was unharmed but trembling, his large eyes darting nervously in the dim headlights. Daniel ran a hand over the young stallion's neck, murmuring softly to calm him. Titan huffed, his breath warm against Daniel's palm. Carter walked up, shaking his head as he surveyed the wreckage. "You two really went all out." Miguel scoffed. "They started it. The police took over, cuffing the thieves and securing the scene." One officer approached Daniel. "We'll need a full report from you in the morning." Daniel nodded, though his mind was already elsewhere. Titan was safe, but for how long? Whoever had orchestrated this theft had resources, intelligence, and patience. They wouldn't give up easily. That night, they brought Titan home. The ranch felt different, as if the quiet had been permanently disturbed. Laura was waiting at the barn, relief and worry etched on her face. She hugged Daniel tightly. "We need to find out who's behind this, because they're going to try again." Daniel glanced at Titan, who stood in the stall, calm now, but still alert. "I know," he said grimly. In the weeks that followed, security at the ranch was tightened. Cameras were installed, extra locks reinforced. Titan grew stronger by the day, his speed and power becoming undeniable. Then, the offer came. An anonymous buyer, through a third party, offered a staggering amount of money for Titan, more than any horse Daniel had ever seen sold for. He refused without hesitation. Days later, a warning was left at the gate, nothing more than a broken lock and fresh tire tracks in the dirt. A message, clear and unmistakable. They were still watching. Titan belonged here, with them, and no amount of money or threats would change that. As Daniel looked out at the vast, open land of the ranch, watching Titan gallop freely under the golden sky, he knew one thing: this wasn't over. But neither was he. Months passed, but the tension never fully faded. The fear of another attempt on Titan loomed over them like a storm cloud. But Daniel wasn't about to sit back and wait. With the help of Carter and Laura, he dug deeper into the origins of the theft. They traced the anonymous buyer to a powerful breeding syndicate overseas, people who had been willing to go to any lengths to claim a horse of Titan's caliber. Daniel realized that as long as Titan remained in public view, he would always be a target. The solution wasn't just better security. It was something more drastic. One night, he made the decision. Weeks later, news quietly spread through the industry. Titan had been sold and transported to an undisclosed location. No details were given. No buyer was named. The syndicate lost interest, believing the stallion was now beyond their reach. But the truth was different. Titan was still with Daniel. He had relocated the young stallion to a vast, remote sanctuary, a place far from prying eyes, surrounded by trusted people who would protect him. Here, Titan could grow without fear, without the weight of those who sought to exploit him. Years later, Daniel stood by the fence of the sanctuary, watching as Titan, now a fully grown and magnificent stallion, led a small herd across the fields. Strong, free, unstoppable. The world had forgotten about him. But Daniel never would. Titan was finally safe, forever. Thank you all for following this journey to the end. I hope you enjoyed the story of Titan and his incredible path to freedom. If you liked it, don't forget to hit the like button. Subscribe for more exciting stories. And leave a comment with the number 6 to let me know you enjoyed it. Your support means a lot. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you in the next story.